A young woman with everything to live for.
She was going to marry the man of her dreams.
Nobody has any answers as to where she went and what happened.
Until an unsolved murder of a different woman offers clues.
3 weeks before her wedding, Nikki McCowan had everything to live for. On July 22nd, 2001, she disappeared from an ordinary laundromat in Richmond, Indiana, and no one has seen her since. Her car would be found months later, empty. Her last words to her mother, "I'll be okay, Mom," would echo for decades. What happened in those minutes after she walked back inside? Someone knows. They're just not telling. But to understand how an ordinary Sunday became an unsolved mystery, we have to go back to the beginning. 21 days until Nikki McCowan became Mrs. Robert Webster. She had worked her way up from correctional guard to head accountant at the Montgomery Pre-Release Center while raising her daughter Peyton alone. Now, weeks away from marrying her high school sweetheart, the future she'd built looked solid. July 22nd, 2001. Sunday morning in Richmond, Indiana. She and Bobby attended church as they did every Sunday. The wedding 3 weeks out. Afterward, back at the apartment, they worked through final details, invitations that still needed addressing, small decisions that belonged to the life they were about to begin. Bobby Webster had left Richmond for California in 1991, but returned years later to propose to the woman he'd dated in high school. Now the calendar held a date that mattered, August 18th. "We're getting married August 18th, just taking care of the final steps," Nikki told him that afternoon. She gathered laundry and made her plan. Bobby needed to get his tuxedo sized at the mall. She'd handle the practical work. "I'll knock out the laundry while you're at the mall getting the tuxedo sized," she said. "I'll be back by 4 or 5 to do the wedding invitations that evening." Before heading to the laundromat, she dropped 9-year-old Peyton at her parents' house. Peyton was the center of Nikki's world, the reason she worked double shifts and fought to build something stable. Her mother, who had raised 10 children in Richmond, was always ready to watch her granddaughter on a Sunday afternoon. Nikki left for the laundromat, clothes in the dryer, time to kill. She drove back to her parents' house while the cycle finished, but when she walked through the door the second time, something had shifted. She was agitated, her calm gone. Men had been hassling her at the laundromat, she told her mother. "Now calm down. Nikki, calm down. You're going to be okay," her mother said. The solution seemed obvious. "If it's troubling you that much, just go get your clothes and bring them here and finish drying them downstairs." Nikki refused. She was troubled enough to come home and tell her mother. Troubled enough that her agitation showed, but not troubled enough, or perhaps too determined, to accept the offer of safety. No one in that house knew they were counting down to something else entirely. "I'll be okay, Mum," Nikki said, those 4 words. Her mother heard them as reassurance, the kind of thing a grown daughter says when her mother worries too much. Just an errand. Just laundry. Nikki left the house. Her mother watched her go, thinking it was ordinary. "I'll be back, Mum." The car engine started. Summer light slanted through the trees. Nikki McCowan drove back toward the laundromat, back toward whatever had unsettled her enough to come home, but not enough to stay. By the time Bobby returned from the tuxedo store hours later, she still wasn't home. The wedding invitations sat untouched on the table. Her truck wasn't in the driveway. Her sandals weren't by the door. She would never come home again. The first sign that something was wrong came at 6 p.m. when Bobby Webster noticed what wasn't there. He'd returned from the tuxedo store between 5 and 6, expecting to find Nikki home with the laundry folded, the wedding invitations spread across the table. Instead, he walked into silence. Her sandals weren't by the door. Her truck wasn't in the driveway. "I didn't see the laundry there, or my truck," he said later. "I just figured that I'd gotten home before she did." An hour passed. No headlights in the drive, no sound of her key in the lock. The time I thought something may be wrong was between 6 and 7, with no phone call or anything. Another hour. The wedding invitations still waiting. Peyton still at her grandparents' house, wondering when her mother would come get her. From that point, it went to another hour. There's been no word. Absence has its own weight. The longer the empty doorway stayed empty, the heavier it became. By 6:30 p.m., Michelle, one of Nikki's 9 siblings, was making calls across Richmond, asking family if anyone had seen her sister. "Bobby's been calling, looking around for her. He can't find her." Their mother reached for the easiest explanation, the one that kept the world normal. "Oh, she's probably out shopping or something." When that didn't settle, she tried again. "You know how Nikki sometimes, just on the spur of the moment, would jump in her car and go over to Ohio?" Nikki did work in Dayton. It was possible. People grasp for normal explanations because the alternative is unthinkable. But Nikki wasn't at work. She wasn't answering her phone, and she was supposed to have picked up Peyton hours ago. What none of them knew yet was that the laundromat held no answers either. By 10 p.m., the word missing was spoken aloud for the first time. Bobby and family members climbed into vehicles and drove toward Dayton, scanning the dark highways for signs of an accident, some explanation that would end this. The first thing within my mind is something has happened as far as a vehicle accident, Bobby said. "We drove to Dayton to see if she might have been stuck, or she didn't have a cell phone or any way to call. Nobody. They found nothing. No wreckage, no truck pulled to the shoulder, no Nikki walking along the roadside with a story about a breakdown and a dead battery. The highways were empty. And that emptiness confirmed what they were all beginning to understand. Nikki's father insisted they couldn't wait any longer. At 2 a.m. on July 23rd, they walked into the Richmond police station and filed a missing persons report. The fluorescent lights overhead turned the waiting room clinical, made the moment official in a way the previous 8 hours of searching hadn't been. Everybody seemed really, really concerned. It was really starting to hit everybody at that time. The report documented what they knew of Nikki McCowan. 28, missing since Sunday afternoon. Her purse was still in the apartment. Her ID, her clothes. Everything was there except the laundry she'd taken with her that afternoon. And Nikki herself. The surveillance footage should have answered everything. Instead, it only deepened the mystery. By morning on July 23rd, the missing persons report had moved through channels at Richmond Police Department. The detectives handling Nikki's case reviewed what they had. A woman who'd gone to do laundry and hadn't come home. No ransom call, no body, no witnesses reporting trouble. There were no phone calls indicating any trouble, investigators told the family. There were no indicators that any harm had come to her. The bureaucratic calm met the family's rising panic like a wall. Mrs. McCowan and Michelle sat across from officers who were following protocol while their daughter and sister was somewhere out there, missing for 16 hours now. "We need to check the usual places first, friends, relatives, her workplace, the investigators said. She wouldn't just leave, Mrs. McCowan said. Not Nikki. Not without Peyton. But procedures exist because most missing persons walk back through their own front doors within 48 hours. The police were playing the odds. The family was living the exception. By afternoon, Michelle and her mother had located surveillance footage from Village Pantry, a deli near the laundromat. The grainy video showed Nikki stopping in that Sunday, walking through the store like it was any other errand. The Village Pantry did show her stopping in. I think she may have purchased a Coke or something. They watched the tape, rewinding and replaying. Nikki looked completely normal. At that moment, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Her car was visible in the parking lot. When she left the store and walked back to her truck, no one followed her, no suspicious vehicles, no signs of distress. We can see her car sitting on the lot, and then we see her leaving and no one following her. The footage showed her alive, normal, buying a Coke on a Sunday afternoon, and that was somehow worse than finding nothing at all, because it meant whatever happened came after that moment, in some gap the cameras didn't capture. Police reviewed the same footage and arrived at a different conclusion. The wedding was
We're getting married August 18th and pretty much taking care of the final steps and stages to get that taken care of.
Nikki and Bobby had been together, then apart, then together again over the years. We thought, well, okay, were they fighting? Were they arguing? The theory took shape in the questions they asked. Does she have cold feet and just decide that, hey, I'm taking off? The word entered the conversation for the first time voluntarily. Maybe Nikki hadn't been taken. Maybe she'd left. Maybe the laundry was still in the dryer because she'd decided. Somewhere between the Village Pantry and home, that she didn't want the life waiting for her there. The wedding. The invitations. The future as Mrs. Robert Webster. She would never abandon Peyton, Mrs. McCowan said, her voice harder now. Never. You don't know Nikki. But police work with patterns, and the pattern here fit a narrative they'd seen before. Pre-wedding jitters. A woman who needed space. A family too close to see the signs. The investigation began to shift, almost imperceptibly, from help us find her to did she want to be found? Police saw a bride with cold feet. The McCowan family saw a woman who would never leave her daughter. One of them was catastrophically wrong. The morning after Nikki disappeared, Bobby Webster picked up the phone and called her college. Not the hospitals, not the police asking for updates, not Nikki's co-workers. He called the community college where she was taking classes. The day after she goes missing, he calls the community college and is wanting all of her college money, a financial aid officer recalled later. The woman who handled tuition accounts remembered the call. Bobby demanded that all of Nikki's tuition funds be refunded to him immediately. When she explained the college's policies, his voice changed. He gets so irate with the person he talks to on the phone. But there was a problem with his demand. She has no money. Her college is being paid by her employer. Nikki's tuition came directly from her job at the Montgomery Pre-Release Center. There was no deposit to recover, no check to cash, no money sitting in an account with Bobby's name on it. The timing told its own story. 24 hours after filing a missing persons report, Bobby was chasing money that didn't exist. By Wednesday, 2 days later, he'd moved to his next recovery operation, the jewelry store in Richmond where Nikki had bought his wedding rings. The man who'd sold her those rings watched Bobby walk through the door with a request that didn't match a man expecting his fiancée home any minute. On Wednesday, he goes to the jewellery store and tries to take back the wedding rings that she had purchased for him. The jeweller processed the return. The rings went back into their velvet box. The deposit, Nikki's deposit, paid with her money, went into Bobby's wallet. His explanation, when questioned later, had a practical edge. "I just wanted the deposit back to buy a cell phone, because we didn't have one at the time." There was so much running around involved. I thought that might be a tool that would help us. What does a man do when his fiancée disappears without a trace? This wasn't it. By midweek, Bobby had cancelled the wedding venue and demanded that deposit back too. 3 weeks before the ceremony, with Nikki missing less than a week, the wedding was officially erased. Word reached the McCowan family fast. "He's talking about cancelling the wedding like he knew she wasn't coming back." Michelle's question cut to the bone. Why would you cancel a wedding so fast? Nikki wanted to get married so bad, so why are you already automatically giving up on her? Most people in Bobby's position would be paralysed by hope, waiting for the phone to ring, maintaining the wedding date like keeping faith, refusing to change anything until there was proof she wasn't coming back. Bobby was recovering deposits, returning rings, dismantling a future before anyone confirmed there wouldn't be one. He wasn't preparing to find Nikki. He was preparing for her to be gone. 3 days after Nikki vanished, Bobby had already recovered hundreds of dollars and erased the wedding from his calendar. The McCowan family had a new theory about where Nikki might be and why. The polygraph examiner asked Bobby Webster one question that mattered. Did you have anything to do with the disappearance of Nikki McCowan? Or do you know anything about her disappearance? Bobby said no. The technician who administered the test watched the machine record his answer needles, tracking respiration, blood pressure, pulse, skin conductivity. What the examiner saw on those readouts wasn't subtle. It about blew the needle off the chart, indicating that he was lying to us. Polygraphs don't measure truth. They measure fear, anxiety. Bobby's body had responded like a man with something to hide. His explanation, when confronted, sounded reasonable. Do I feel responsible? Who isn't going to feel responsible for not being there to protect their woman if they think she was in a position where she needed help? Guilt about not protecting someone isn't the same as guilt about harming them. But the machine didn't distinguish between those two kinds of responsibility. Police labelled him a person of interest. The person of interest, by definition, is someone who is able to give the police information that can help them with a case. Someone who knows more than he's saying. Someone whose behaviour the money calls. The returned rings, the cancelled wedding, reads like a man who already knew there wouldn't be a bride. But knowing and doing are different things in the eyes of the law. We still have no evidence to link him to any crime, investigators admitted. He knows something more than what he's telling us, and it's a matter of trying to get him to talk. A failed polygraph, suspicious behaviour, and no evidence Bobby Webster was trapped in a circle of suspicion with no way to prove his innocence and no way for police to prove his guilt. Then Michelle sat down with investigators and gave them a second name. Tommy Swint worked alongside Nikki at the Montgomery Pre-Release Center, someone she'd once considered protective like an older brother, until the day that trust shattered. I had stopped by Nikki's apartment, Michelle told them. Outside, I could hear her screaming. She described what she'd found when she opened the door. As I opened the door, she's sitting on a chair with her foot inside his chest. He's, like, laying over. And she's like, "Help! He's trying to rape me!" Swint had forced himself on Nikki in her own apartment. Michelle had walked in at the moment Nikki was fighting him off. Her foot pressed against his chest, creating distance between his body and hers. The assault had happened before Nikki disappeared. She'd trusted him, called him a friend, let him into her space because she believed he was safe. He was more like a big brother to her. But in his eyes, I think that he was looking at her in a different light than she was looking at him. And now Nikki was gone. 2 men now circled her disappearance. Her fiancé, who'd failed a lie detector test and couldn't explain why he'd dismantled their wedding so quickly, and a co-worker who'd once attacked her and saw her as more than a friend. But police still had no evidence, no body, and no Nikki. When police couldn't move on Bobby Webster or Tommy Swint, the McCowan family printed 5,000 flyers and decided to find Nikki themselves. August 2001, 1 month since that Sunday at the laundromat. The investigation had stalled with 2 suspects circling and no evidence pointing at either one. The family couldn't wait for warrants or proof or official procedure. They blanketed Richmond and Dayton with Nikki's face. Flyers on every telephone pole, in every store window, taped to gas station pumps and restaurant doors. Mrs. McCowan led the charge, her other children fanning out across both cities. We were looking, searching, knocking on doors everywhere that we think she may have gone, Michelle said. We passed out flyers trying to get some attention for Nikki so we could get some help. Keeping the case visible was survival strategy and agony in equal measure. That's the thing that they tell you to do. Keep it in the media's attention. Don't let them forget. But visibility brought its own torture. The calls started coming in, anonymous tips, people claiming to know where Nikki was. Some wanted money, some wanted attention. Each tip sent the family racing to another address, another house where someone swore Nikki was being held. People would tell us, Nikki's in this house, and the whole family would get in a car and go there. They arrived ready for confrontation, ready to break through whatever stood between them and answers. It would get really, really chaotic, because we're like wanting to kick the door in and stuff. Grief doesn't wait for permission. We're not waiting for warrants, we're not waiting for permission. Every door they pounded on was a door Nikki wasn't behind. But they couldn't stop looking, couldn't accept that searching might be all they'd ever do. Richmond police watched the McCowans chase rumours through neighbourhoods, confronting homeowners who'd done nothing wrong except live at an address someone had phoned in. The aggressive tactics escalated.
He said, "I'll be okay, Mom."
Family and friends gathered at the same spot, candles lit against the evening. We gathered at the laundromat and we had candles lit. Peyton stepped forward. She'd been 9 years old when her mother disappeared. A child whose biggest worry was whether she'd get picked up on time. Now she was 14. 5 years spent waiting. 5 years growing up without the mother who'd worked double shifts to give her everything. She spoke to the crowd, to the cameras, to whoever had taken Nikki. "Please, just do it. Just not for the family. Just do it for your own good." Her voice carried across the parking lot, past where her mother's truck had been loaded with folded laundry. Just don't keep her away from us, because she needs us, and we need her. 5 years gone. Peyton was 9 when her mother disappeared. Now she was 14, standing at the laundromat, begging for something she was old enough to know might never come. The reward hadn't worked. The psychic hadn't worked. Nothing had worked. But in 1 year, something would just not the way anyone expected. The break would come from the last place anyone was looking. In 2007, 6 years after Nikki McCowan vanished, Tommy Swint put on a police uniform for the city of Trotwood, Ohio. The break came from the last place anyone expected. Not evidence, not a witness, but a scandal that would force Swint into the light after 6 years of silence. Richmond detectives received stunning news. Swint, still a person of interest in Nikki's disappearance, had been hired as a Trotwood police officer. The man who'd refused to cooperate, who lived a quarter mile from where Nikki's truck was abandoned, was now wearing a badge. We were shocked that he would be working as a police officer. Michelle's response was immediate. How are they going to give somebody like this a job as a police officer? How did this just slip through the cracks? Richmond notified Trotwood Command. The person of interest in an unsolved disappearance had somehow become a police officer. The department moved swiftly. He was told to resign or they would start termination process on him. Swint resigned. But he didn't go quietly. Stung by his firing, he responded with lawsuits against Richmond. At a press conference, Swint's lawyer stood beside him, claiming Richmond police had never properly identified his client as a person of interest. He was never identified as a suspect, never identified as a person of interest, never charged with a crime, the attorney said. Swint addressed the cameras. There was not one time that Detective Richmond told me or informed me that I was a suspect or a person of interest. 6 years of refusing to cooperate. And now, Tommy Swint was publicly claiming he'd done more than enough. The contradiction would cost him everything. I cooperated more than I had to with Richmond police. The lawsuits went nowhere. But that phrase, cooperated, more than I had to caught investigators' attention. Before we reveal what that DNA sample would uncover, comment A or B and add one reason why in 8 to 12 words. A equals, the DNA will prove he's innocent. Or B equals, this will backfire on him. Please note, the next part includes some recreated details for narrative purposes. Richmond investigators saw their opening. Swint claimed he'd cooperated fully. Then he wouldn't mind giving them DNA. Okay, if you say you're cooperating, give us your DNA. They made the request. Swint, confident and eager to clear his name after losing his police job, agreed. We take DNA samples for several reasons. 1. If something would show up later on, if we could find Nikki McCowan's body, if there was any DNA on her, we would have that to match up. The sample went into Richmond Police evidence storage, labelled with Swint's name and a case file about a woman who disappeared in 2001. He gave it voluntarily. He thought it would prove he had nothing to do with Nikki. Tommy Swint volunteered his DNA to prove his innocence in Nikki McCowan's case, but that sample would eventually prove something else entirely. Richmond Police had what they'd been trying to get for 6 years, Tommy Swint's DNA. Voluntarily given, properly documented, ready to be tested. They just didn't know yet that it would solve the wrong case. That revelation would come from a phone call no one saw coming. The headlines about Tommy Swint's firing reached someone who'd been carrying a secret for 16 years. November 2007. Swint's connection to Nikki McCowan saturated newspapers across Dayton and Richmond. It was very much all over the news. There were news stories in our paper, news stories in the Dayton paper. Someone read those stories and picked up a phone. The call came into Dayton Police Department's cold case unit, anonymous, brief, and explosive. You need to look at Tommy Swint for the Tina Marie Ivory murder. It was an anonymous tip that called in, and they just stated that we might want to look at him as a suspect. The anonymous tip linked Tommy Swint not to Nikki McCowan's disappearance, but to a completely different murder from 1991. Gave very limited information, but just to the fact that we needed to look at him as a possible suspect. Detective Patty Tackett worked cold case homicides for Dayton police and had spent years looking at the unsolved Tina Marie Ivory murder. She pulled the file. December 1991. 16 years earlier, some forest workers had found a body in a pile of brush near Dayton. What they discovered there was a blanket wrapped around and taped around the body of a young female. Tina Marie Ivory was 33 when she was strangled and her body wrapped in a blanket and tape left in a pile of brush. The body was identified as 33-year-old Tina Marie Ivory. She had been the victim of a vicious strangling. The killer had left DNA on the blanket and tape. For 16 years, that profile sat in the system, waiting for a name. For 16 years, they hadn't had any information as far as who did this to this woman. 2 unsolved cases, 2 women dead or missing, 16 years and 40 miles apart, and now, finally, one name connecting them both. Tackett contacted Richmond police. Aware that Swint is a person of interest in the McCowan case, Dayton detectives approached their counterparts in Richmond. The question was simple. Did Richmond have Tommy Swint's DNA? Richmond investigators checked their evidence storage. The answer stunned everyone. Incredibly, Richmond police can provide Dayton detectives with Swint's DNA. They'd obtained it weeks ago. The same sample Swint had given voluntarily, confident it would clear his name in Nikki McCowan's disappearance. He gave it voluntarily. He wanted to prove he had nothing to do with Nikki McCowan. Now we're testing it for a murder he's never even been asked about. Richmond agreed to send the sample to Dayton's forensic laboratory. The DNA would be compared against the profile extracted from that blanket and tape in 1991. Evidence from a crime scene Swint had never been connected to. Tommy Swint's DNA sample was packaged and shipped from Richmond to Dayton's forensic laboratory. The sample he'd given to prove his innocence in Nikki McCowan's disappearance was about to be tested against evidence from a woman neither the McCowan family nor Richmond detectives had ever heard of. The lab results would take weeks, but when they came back, everything would change. In Dayton's forensic laboratory, technicians compared Tommy Swint's DNA profile to the genetic material recovered from the blanket and tape that had been wrapped around Tina Marie Ivory's body 16 years earlier. The sample Richmond had shipped moved through the standard comparison protocol, its genetic markers analyzed against evidence that had waited since 1991. On the technicians' screens, peaks aligned one after another. First locus, second, third, each match narrowing the statistical field, eliminating coincidence. By the time the 13th locus aligned, the probability of a random match had collapsed to 1 in several trillion. The DNA recovered from that blanket and tape belonged to Tommy Swint. The laboratory generated a formal report and contacted Dayton police. Detective Patty Tackett received the call that ended 16 years of silence. The man who had given his DNA voluntarily to clear himself in the Nikki McCowan investigation had just been definitively linked to a murder he'd never been asked about. Tackett reviewed the match report, its scientific certainty printed in stark technical language. 13 loci, statistical probability beyond reasonable doubt, physical evidence that placed Swint at a murder scene from December 1991. This was the kind of forensic proof detectives spent careers hoping for. But as she read through the documentation, a practical concern surfaced. DNA evidence was powerful, but prosecutors often wanted more. Defense attorneys could challenge collection methods, storage conditions, chain of custody from a case this old. A single piece of evidence, even one this strong, might become a single point of attack. Was one match enough to guarantee a conviction, or would Swint's attorney find a way to cast doubt?
And he said no, and according to the polygraph operator, it about blew the needle off the chart, indicating that he was lying to us.
Tackett found images of tape that had bound the victim's body, tape that had been tested for prints in 1991 and yielded nothing visible. She sent the actual tape evidence to a forensic examiner for reanalysis using technology that hadn't existed 16 years earlier. The examiner applied updated chemical processing methods and digital enhancement techniques. Where the 1991 technicians had found blank adhesive, the newer methods revealed something different. A palm print, faint, partial, but unmistakably present on the tape surface. "We have something here," the examiner told Tackett over the phone. "A palm print. It wasn't visible in 91, but it's clear now." How clear? Clear enough to run through AFIS. But AFIS, the automated fingerprint identification system, only worked if the suspect's prints were already in the database. Tommy Swint's weren't. He'd never been arrested for a felony that required fingerprinting. The investigators knew who they needed to compare the print to. They just needed to get his palm prints first. Swint had relocated to Alabama after leaving Richmond. Tackett coordinated with local detectives there, and they arranged a traffic stop, not an arrest, a request for cooperation. When the Alabama officers pulled Swint over and explained what they needed, his response echoed the confidence he'd shown before. "I already gave DNA," he said. "What else do you need?" "Just prints," one of the detectives replied. "Won't take long." Swint agreed. He followed them to the station, where a technician rolled ink across his palms and fingers, pressing each one carefully onto standard cards. The ridge patterns transferred in precise detail, loops, whirls, pressure points, all captured on paper. Technology had unlocked what darkness had hidden. A palm pressed against tape in 1991 had left a signature that waited 16 years to be read. Now that signature would either match the man sitting in an Alabama police station, or it wouldn't. There was no middle ground. The prints were photographed, digitized, and sent to Dayton's forensic lab. An examiner placed Swint's palm prints side by side with the impression lifted from the tape. On the screens, both images appeared in sharp black and white ridge patterns, minutiae points, pressure variations. The comparison began. First point of correspondence, second, third. By the time 13 points aligned, the conclusion was statistically undeniable. "It's a match," the examiner confirmed. 13 points of comparison. His palm was on that tape. Tackett received the report the same way she'd received the DNA results, with the certainty of science reducing 16 years of questions to a single fact. Tom Swint's hand had touched the tape that wrapped Tina Marie Ivory's body. Not speculation, not circumstantial connection, physical contact, documented by the ridges of his own skin. "So we have DNA and a palm print," Tackett said. "Both from the same crime scene," the examiner confirmed. "Both matching the same man." Tackett now held two pieces of physical evidence from a single crime scene, both pointing to the same person. DNA and a palm print, both belonging to Tommy Swint, but both connected to Tina Marie Ivory, not Nikki McCowan. The evidence proved Swint was a killer. It just didn't prove he'd killed the woman whose disappearance had started the entire investigation. Richmond prosecutors reviewed the evidence against Tommy Swint and recognized they had a solid case for Tina Marie Ivory's murder. But the investigation had begun with Nikki McCowan, and that case still lacked the physical proof they needed. Dayton moved forward with what they could prove. In early 2008, a prosecutor presented the evidence to a grand jury. DNA palm print. 16 years separating the crime from the match, but the science was absolute. 2 pieces of physical evidence, both recovered from the blanket and tape that had wrapped Tina Marie Ivory's body, both belonging to Tommy Swint. The DNA profile matches at 13 loci, the prosecutor told the grand jury. The palm print shows 17 points of comparison. The evidence appeared on screens, genetic markers aligned in columns, ridge patterns magnified and overlaid. The prosecutor walked through the timeline. December 1991. Body discovered. Evidence collected but yielded no suspect. 2007. Anonymous tip leads to comparison with Swint's voluntary DNA sample. Match confirmed. Re-examination of tape reveals palm print invisible to 1991 technology. Print matches Swint. Both pieces of evidence recovered from the same crime scene, the prosecutor continued, both pointing to the same man, Tommy Swint. The grand jury deliberated. The standard wasn't beyond reasonable doubt, not yet, just probable cause. Did the evidence establish sufficient reason to believe Tommy Swint had committed murder? The vote came quickly. We, the grand jury, find probable cause to charge Tommy Swint with murder. A judge reviewed the indictment and signed the arrest warrant. The document carried the weight of 16 years Tina Marie Ivory's name at the top, Tommy Swint's at the bottom. Warrant signed, the judge said. He's in Alabama. We'll need to coordinate with their authorities. Tackett received word the same day, after 16 years of pursuing leads that dissolved into nothing. Tina Marie Ivory's murder finally had a defendant. 16 years, she said. We finally have him for Tina Marie. But even as Dayton prepared to notify Alabama authorities, the reality settled over everyone involved. They could prove Swint killed Tina Marie Ivory. They couldn't prove he'd done anything to Nikki McCowan. DNA and a palm print tied him to one murder. The other case remained built on circumstantial connections, proximity, behavior, opportunity, nothing physical, nothing definitive. Dayton contacted Alabama law enforcement with the warrant details. Richmond investigators monitored from a distance, knowing the indictment answered one question while leaving another untouched. We're issuing a warrant for Tommy Swint, Dayton told Alabama authorities. He's in your jurisdiction. The request went beyond simple execution. Richmond investigators hoped the arrest might finally break whatever wall Swint had maintained since Nikki disappeared. If he talks after arrest, ask about Richmond, they said. Ask about Nikki McCowan. We can prove Ivory, Tackett said, but we still need him to tell us about Nikki. After 16 years, justice for Tina Marie Ivory was moving forward. But Nikki McCowan's family was still waiting. The warrant carried Tommy Swint's name for one murder. Alabama authorities prepared to make the arrest. But detectives in Richmond and Dayton shared the same question. Would bringing him in finally break his silence about what happened to Nikki McCowan? Alabama authorities executed the warrant in early 2008. Less than 60 minutes after the grand jury returned the indictment, officers arrived at Tommy Swint's residence in Russell County. The coordination was routine, standard arrest protocol for a murder warrant. 2 officers approached the front door, others positioned around the perimeter. Radio check. Visual confirmation of the address. Everything by procedure. "We're at the residence," one officer radioed. "Moving to the door now." Before they left the vehicles, the reminder came through one more time. Richmond and Dayton both wanted the same thing. "Remember, Richmond wants us to ask about Nikki McCowan if he talks." The officers reached the front door. One stepped forward, hand raised to knock, prepared to announce the warrant. "Arrest warrant for Tommy Swint, murder. Tina Marie Ivory, 16 years. A single gunshot cracked from inside the house. The sound was unmistakable. Close range, interior. The kind of shot that leaves no ambiguity about what just happened. Gunshot, gunshot, inside. Procedure collapsed into urgency. The door became an obstacle to be eliminated, not a threshold to be announced at. Officers positioned, shoulders squared. "Break it down now. Go, go, go." The door gave way. Officers entered with weapons drawn. Training dictating movement even as minds processed what that single shot likely meant. They moved through the entrance, clearing angles, scanning for threats. Tommy Swint lay on the floor, a gun beside him. Single gunshot wound, self-inflicted. No movement, no breath, no possibility of resuscitation. He's gone, self-inflicted.
There's her laundry, there's her car, so where's Nikki?
Someone knows what happened. They're just not telling. What happened inside that laundromat? In the minutes after Nikki walked back in, no one ever found out. And now, no one ever will. But the McCowan family lived with more than just questions. They lived with the knowledge that their search had meant something beyond their own loss. They got answers because of her, because we kept asking. Tina Marie's family knows what happened. We never will. But maybe that means something. Maybe Nikki helped them, even after everything. The pressure the McCowans kept on Tommy Swint, the DNA he volunteered to prove his innocence in Nikki's case. It had solved Tina Marie Ivory's 16-year-old murder.
It was an anonymous tip that called in, and they just stated that we might want to look at him as a suspect.
One family would never know. But another family finally could. Nikki McCowan's case remains open in Richmond. Indiana, a file that never closes, questions that never get answered. Her daughter Peyton grew up without her.
They heard a gunshot, and they went into the house.
But somewhere in the space between grief and justice, they found a truth to hold Nikki's unsolved disappearance, had given another family the answers she herself would never receive. He gave his DNA to prove he was innocent. It proved the opposite, just not for the name everyone in Richmond was still waiting to hear. Nikki McCowan's case remains open in Richmond. Indiana, a file that holds more questions than answers. What stays with me is not just what we don't know, but what we do. A family that refused to stop searching. A mother who carried 20 years of unanswered questions. And a daughter who grew up wondering what happened in those final minutes her mother walked back into that laundromat. The McCowan family never got their closure. But their pursuit of truth gave another family, Tina Marie Ivory's family, the answers they'd waited 16 years to hear. That matters. Even when justice feels incomplete. Even when questions outlive those who ask them, the search for truth can still light a path for someone else. Some cases are solved, some stay cold. But every search for answers, every family that refuses to let a name fade into silence, leaves something behind. Not always closure, sometimes just proof that someone was loved enough to never stop looking. If this story moved you, Please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts. What struck you most about Nikki's case? Your engagement helps stories like this reach others who need to hear them. And if you know someone who values true crime told with respect and depth, share this video with them. Thank you for listening with me today. This story is based on a real case, with some scenes dramatized for storytelling from available evidence and court records. My deepest respect goes to Nikki McCowan's family and loved ones, who continue to live with unanswered questions. And to Tina Marie Ivory's family, who finally received the truth they deserved.